Hi, welcome back to my read-along of A Tale of Stars and Shadow. Today we are up to chapter 15. I'm going to get straight into it. Okay. Talyn awoke to the sound of loud banging. Instinct took over, the sudden noise sending her into a quick roll off the bed to land in a fighting crouch on the floor, one hand shooting out to grab the sai resting on her bedside table. Once her sleep-groggy mind processed it was someone knocking at the door, not an invasion of her room, she relaxed and stood straight. Keeping the sai in one hand, she pulled on a robe over the loose shirt she slept in and went to open the door. Her eyes widened in surprise at the sight of Halun's bulk filling up the entryway. "Halun, it's after midnight. What are you doing here?" "I need you to come with me, Captain." He was standing straight and tall, hands clasped loosely at the small of his back in the way she'd been teaching them only the day before. Something about that made her smile, despite the odd tone of his voice. "Why? Is there something wrong? Is someone hurt?" "It's about Theac. He's not hurt, but—" He shifted his weight from foot to foot, ruining his stance in his agitation. Talking so much was clearly making him uncomfortable. "I think it's better if you just come with me, Captain." It was on the tip of her tongue to demand that he tell her what was going on or leave. She was tired and out of sorts, and the last thing she wanted to do was go traipsing through the citadel without knowing why. But instinct checked her. Building trust with these men was already a close to impossible task, and dismissing Halun now would make it harder. He'd come to her for help, and like with Corin, she needed to show him she'd be there. Of course, if it turned out Tirslin and Zamaral had gotten into another squabble in the barracks they couldn't sort out themselves, she would be having a very sharp conversation with all three of them later. "All right, Halun, give me a moment to dress." Relief crumpled his shoulders, making her instantly glad of her decision. Sighing inwardly, she left him standing there and returned to her room to drag on her uniform and buckle on her sais. Back at the door, she gestured for Halun to lead the way and locked it carefully after her. The citadel was quiet at such a late hour, but the darkness was illuminated by artfully arranged lamps and fairy lights that provided plenty of illumination to see where they were going. It was beautiful. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Dock City." "Dock City?" She halted mid-stride. "What's going on?" "I think it would be best if you saw for yourself, Captain," he said cryptically. "Halun—" She hesitated. Another leap of faith. One of these was going to be the wrong call. "All right, fine. Lead the way." His strides quickened, the big man clearly catching her irritation. The night air was much cooler than during the day, but still carried the scent of flowers. They walked down the wall path in silence. Despite the hour, she was almost glad of the opportunity to see the citadel in this light. It was just as stunning as it appeared on a bright sunny day. Dock City was busier than the citadel had been. She supposed that when you had to work for a living, you didn't always have the luxury of sleeping through the whole night. Her stomach grumbled as they passed a baker's shop and the delicious scent of baking bread wafted out onto the street. It must be closer to dawn than she'd thought. She shot Halun a sharp look when the Market Quarter Patrol Headquarters appeared ahead, but he quickened his pace to avoid her questions and took the front steps in one massive stride. Talyn followed him, trepidation curling in her gut. The smug voice of a patrolman greeted them. "We just about gave up on you, Halun. Thought you weren't coming back." Two patrolmen sat at the front desk, and from the money and chips scattered across the table, it looked like she and Halun had interrupted a game of cards. The man that had spoken had a cigar wedged into the corner of his mouth. He was familiar, too, the older patrolman who'd been there when she'd chased down the thieves on her first day. Rolf? The acrid smoke drifting through the room had her eyes watering. Disliking his tone and their slack behaviour, she levelled a stare at Rolf. "Halun, it's time to tell me what's going on." Before he could reply, the door to the back opened and Andros Tai appeared. Unlike the two on the front desk, his uniform was crisp and neat. A flicker of surprise crossed his face at the sight of her. "You came." "Halun asked me to," she said testily. "Can someone please tell me what's going on?" "Come with me, Captain." Andros led her and Halun across the entrance foyer to a barred door. Beyond was a long hallway of cells similar to what she'd seen in the main headquarters. He waved them through, then closed the door behind them, shutting off the curious stares of Rolf and the other patrolmen. "What am I—" But her words slid to a halt as she caught sight of Theac sitting in the first cell. He was cross-legged on a pile of dirty straw and singing at the top of his voice. Even from outside the bars, the stink of alcohol on him was clear. "Halun?" she asked softly. The big man was staring at his feet, all traces of his crisp warrior stance gone. He asked me down to the city for a drink after training finished yesterday. Only, he drank a lot, Captain. We were picked up a full turn ago because he was causing a ruckus outside the inn. Halun asked me not to do anything until he'd fetched you, Andros said quietly, casting a sad glance into the cell. She ignored Andros, gaze firm on Halun. Were any of the others with you? No. Corin and Teersalyn are with their families, and Zamaral doesn't like spending time with any of us outside of training. He hesitated, seemingly torn between embarrassment and reluctance to keep speaking. I didn't know he would drink so much. The drunken warbling reached a high pitch, almost drowning out Halun's last words. The sound was unbearable. Theac! Talyn snapped. The singing cut off, and Theac peered drunkenly through the bars at her. When he recognized her, his face fell, and he looked away. Rolf and the other patrolmen wanted to keep him locked up in here. Apparently he's done this before, a lot. It's why he was kicked out in the first place, Halun said. The big man was folding in on himself, clearly upset and uncomfortable. It struck an odd note. He was so big, so physically fearsome, yet right now he had all the demeanour of a man who'd participated in something wrong and was shamed by it. Disappointment settled in her stomach. Did you know? He hesitated. Then, I heard things. Stifling a sigh, she turned to Andros. What happens now? He'll be sentenced to a week or two of Azurdia extraction if Patrol Captain Finnis, he heads up Market Quarter, is in a good mood. A few months in the city jail if not. Andros hesitated. I haven't yet informed the captain that he's here. His message was clear. Talyn closed her eyes, stifling the urge to reach up and rub her suddenly aching temples. Halun, get him back up to the barracks. I'll sort it out with the patrol. Halun hesitated. He's out of the wing, isn't he? You know the answer to that. I can't afford to have an unreliable drunk guarding the prince. She turned to go, but Halun still hesitated. Then why even bother to take him back? Halun, you have your orders. I know, Captain. Only, I'm losing patience, Talyn snapped. The situation wasn't the big man's fault, but she was furious with Theac and with herself for choosing him in the first place. How could she have gotten it so wrong? Crushing doubt cascaded over her, and the only way to fight and keep her head above it was to focus on her anger. Just do what I say, damn it! Now! She was astonished when he dug in, shoulders straightening again. He had to know he was risking his own position, but the words spilled out of him in a rush, more than she'd ever heard from him. I've heard about Theac before. He was a good captain, fair and kind, but he was strong too. There were no gangs in the Poor Quarter in the years he ran the patrol there. Corin's family would never have had to worry back in those days. He ensured his men helped people. The last part was mumbled so incoherently that even Talyn's sharp hearing barely picked up the words. She kept her face and voice resolute. You have your orders, Halun. Take him back to the barracks. Do as I say, or you're out too. Am I clear? Yes, Captain. Andros said nothing as he unlocked the cell and stood outside while Halun went in, hefted Theac to his feet, and proceeded to drag him out. Rolf was opening his mouth in protest when she and Andros followed them into the entrance foyer. Orders from the wing guard, Andros said crisply. He's one of theirs now, so it's up to them to deal with him. But watch officer, Theac is ours, Talyn said coolly, capturing Rolf's stare with unyielding steel and holding it until he looked away. We'll take it from here. Andros accompanied her to the exit. You could face trouble with the Falcon for this, he murmured in a low voice. I can't guarantee one of my patrolmen won't tattle to the wing guard. I'll deal with it, she said. Thanks for helping Halun, and for helping Theac too. I owe Parkson one, Andros said, but I can't keep stepping in. I'll be on thin ice with Finnis after this. Theac is a grown man. He can look after himself. Her voice was short, made so by anger and weariness. I know, Andros nodded, looked away. I heard what you did for Corindariel's family. You should be careful, Captain. Why? She frowned. Because Wingard don't do things to help humans. I'm not Wingard. He lifted his hands in the air as if in surrender. Just a friendly warning. I'm sorry you had to get dragged down here tonight. I'll be back soon, she said, voice softening. Buy you another drink in thanks. By the time Talyn got back to her rooms, she was wound up and unable to sleep. She went to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of something Corin had convinced her to buy down in Dock City. It was alcoholic, strong and flavoured with coconut. She poured a half glass, then went and slumped down into a chair by her empty fireplace. Taking a long swallow, she allowed her head to drop back against the cushions, enjoying the searing path the alcohol burned down the back of her throat. She was angry. Despite its many frustrations, coming to Mithraena had so far been good for her. The challenge of trying to put together a functioning wing had kept her from thinking about home or what had happened. It was a fresh start of sorts, without everything around her constantly reminding her of Sari. But tonight, faced with what she was going to have to do in a few hours, she just wanted to go back to a time when she was a Callanan, fighting alongside her partner, reveling in the thrill of the chase. She didn't want this. She didn't want anything but that. The tears spilled silently down her cheeks. In the deathly quiet hour before dawn, Talyn opened the door to Theac's room without knocking. As her second, he had a tiny but private room adjacent to the dormitory where the others slept. He was sitting on the edge of his cot, face pale and drawn in the moonlight shining through the window. She doubted he'd had any sleep either. Yet despite his haggard appearance, he was awake and had shaved and dressed. Clearly he'd been waiting for her. "Big night last night?" she asked. "Something like that," he grunted. "I hear this sort of thing is a habit with you, Theac. In fact, I heard your drunken behaviour is the reason you got kicked out of the city patrol. Is that true?" He nodded. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't kick you out of this wing too." Her voice became hard as ice. His jaw clenched. "It won't happen again, Captain." "No, I need something better than that. I need a second who I can rely on all the time, not just when he's sober. You disappointed me, and I don't want to give you another chance. I wouldn't even be standing here if Halun hadn't intervened on your behalf. The man who's barely spoken 2 words since I met him, who is so withdrawn he seems afraid of his own voice, he spoke for you last night, Theac. He says you were a good man once, a good leader." She paused. "But in protective detail, a drunk could cause the deaths of his charge and his wingmates. And if that happened, that's on me. Do you understand?" Theac's jaw clenched again, and he turned away, wincing slightly as the movement probably tore through an aching head. When he turned back, his scowl had faded to hopelessness. "I need this, Captain. I truly want to straighten myself up." "Then what was last night about?" "Pushing the boundaries until I screwed things up so completely you'd have no choice but to kick me out," he muttered. She kept her voice sharp. "What's to stop that happening again?" His shoulders sagged, and despair added to the hopelessness on his face. "Rock bottom is not a nice place to be, Captain." "Theac." He looked up to meet her eyes, his bloodshot gaze filled with resolution. "I promise you here and now that it will not happen again. If it does, I'll walk away before you have to tell me to, and I'll hand myself back to the city patrol." She wavered, still uncertain. "You say that you need this position, but you haven't been too interested so far. In fact, you've been downright obstinate." He turned away. "Like I said, Captain, I was self-destructing." "Why?" she pushed. "What changed?" He took a deep, shuddering breath, but his gaze didn't leave hers. "Life can be pretty awful for the human folk in Dock City. I should know. I grew up with practically nothing. I've seen horrors that no child should ever—" He broke off. "I wanted to at least try and keep people safe from being robbed or raped or killed for their coin. I wanted to make sure the Falcons had as little excuse as possible for treating us even more badly than they already did." "So why did you start drinking?" "I've been running from the demons of my childhood ever since I was old enough to escape them, and it eventually caught up to me. Every crime started to get to me until the only way I could escape the pain was to drink." "I see." Talyn turned towards the door. His words, the utter grim aching of them, had gotten to her, and she didn't want him to see that. The brokenness he talked about, she knew it all too well, and just like with Corin and Zamaral, she wanted the same hope Theac was asking for. In the end, she took a deep breath and turned back to him. "All right, you stay for now." Theac looked stunned, and as her words sank in, he forced himself to his feet. "Thank you, Captain. You won't regret it." "It isn't me you should thank." She stopped in the doorway. "Halun stood up for you last night and risked himself to do it. Don't make him regret his words, and don't make me regret my weakness, because that's what this is, me giving you a second chance. Weakness." He nodded, again unafraid to meet her eyes. Angry with herself, Talyn turned and stalked out the door. "Talyn!" "What?" she snapped, turning at the doorway. He held her gaze. "In the wing guard, a Talyn is the commander of an individual detail in a wing. We've only got half a detail, but if I'm your second, then it's Talyn Parkson." She slammed the door behind her. Talyn went straight back to her room so that she could change clothes and splash some cold water on her face before returning to the barracks for dawn drill. She had no sleep apart from the restless hour or two before Halun had woken her, and was emotionally and physically wrung out. "I wouldn't have let him back in." "I know." "The King's shield would have set him packing last night." "I know." "Tal, I love you, but you're not coping and it's causing you to make rash decisions. Theac isn't you, and giving a drunk a second chance doesn't mean you'll suddenly heal from what you're feeling. Maybe if you left me alone, I might be able to forget and move on. She sent the words screaming through her mind, shoving as hard as she could. Sari vanished, whether because of her words or how hard she pushed. It was impossible to know. She patted a towel over her face and stared at herself in the mirror, mentally preparing herself for the day of pushing and cajoling and gritting her teeth through their poor attitude. Still trying to find some way to summon motivation for the day, Talyn dropped down the ladder to the walkway leading into the drill yard and pushed open the creaky gate. Once through, she stopped in astonishment. Instead of finding them sitting disconsolately around the yard as she had every morning so far, Theac was pacing a straight, crisp line, barking orders as he harried the other four through a series of stretches. His eyes were still bloodshot, and he had to be feeling terribly hungover, but his back was straight and his voice boomed in the parade ground bellow she'd heard in the cells that first day. "Captain!" He came over to greet her, carrying a steaming mug in his hand. "I bought this for you from the mess, in case you'd run out of time this morning. It's Carvey." Talyn took the cup. "Thanks." "They're almost done with warm-ups," he continued. "We will be ready for the war run in a few minutes." "Good," she said. Talyn Parkson. "Zamaral!" Theac bellowed, striding away from her. "It's called stretching, not having a nap." She wasn't sure whether to laugh or start crying as she stood there clutching her mug of Carvey. Had she just made the right call in a complex situation, or made another horrible mistake? Oh, Sari, I wish you were here. Okay, that is the end of chapter 15. As always, this is your point to jump out if you don't want to hear any spoilers in my author commentary. If you are jumping out here, thanks for listening with me. I hope you're enjoying it, and I'll hopefully see you soon for chapter 16. Otherwise, please stick around and let's jump into some author commentary. This is quite a heavy chapter in some ways with what kind of unfolds throughout the chapter, but it's also one of my favourite chapters of the book. We start with Halorn waking Talyn up in the middle of the night. It's almost dawn, to basically come down to Dock City with him and help rescue Theac from the jail cells where he's been thrown because he's gotten himself roaringly drunk and then essentially being drunk and disorderly on the streets of Dock City. This is where she learns for the first time that this is actually a pattern of his, that he's an alcoholic, and that's how he was kicked out, or why he was kicked out of the Dock City, despite having quite a stellar career as a city patrolman and a captain of the patrol in the Poor Quarter. We see Halorn here too, really kind of digging in and trying to defend Theac, and that goes to the core really of who Halorn is already. He's someone who, though quiet, for a big man, will fight as hard as he can for those he loves, and he's already starting to see Theac as part of his wing, but also he's heard that during his time on the docks working, he's heard about the good things that Theac did for the humans of Dock City, and he's hoping that man is still in there, and he wants Talyn to give that man a chance. Now, that's a much more difficult decision for Talyn to make. She's absolutely right, and Sari is absolutely right. As the leader of a protective detail, making the decision to keep a drunk in the wing on his word that he's not going to do it again, is probably in a vacuum a very poor decision for a commander to make. In an objective vacuum, Theac can't really be trusted, at least not at this stage. But once again, and maybe this, as Sari makes the point to her towards the end of this chapter, this is where Talyn's grief and guilt perhaps lead her to make not the best decisions in this instance, deciding to keep Theac on because she wants that hope of brokenness being fixed for herself, and she's kind of referring that onto him, and therefore that's the reason she gives him a second chance. But then you get to the end of the chapter and she comes out to the yard and he's doing his job, he's got them all up and running. He's being an actual second, and that's what she needs so desperately. And so you're kind of left with, well, she probably hasn't made the best decision there, but the outcome is probably a great one. And for those of us who've read the books, we know that Theac doesn't really look back from here, and this is the chance that he needed, even though Talyn doesn't know that when she's making the decision. This is what he needed. This is the home he needed, the acceptance he needed, and the trust that he needed from her to properly turn his life around and kind of get back to that man that he was only a bit stronger and a bit more resilient. And every time I read that final scene when he hands her the cup of carvy, and he's just that little thing that a second does for his commander, every time I read it, I love it, and that's why it's one of my favorite chapters. I'd love to know what you think about that decision that Talyn made, and whether it was a good one or a bad one, despite what the outcome was. If you have any other questions about this chapter, drop them in the comments below. I'll happily answer. And I really look forward to seeing you guys for chapter 16, which won't be long. I hope you all have a great day.